Hello, and welcome to the second Mariah Mitchell Women of Science Symposium. My name is Celia Mulcahy. I am a senior at Mount Holyoke College studying astronomy and geology. I am a 2019 alumna of the Mariah Mitchell Association's Observatory's Research Experience for Undergraduates, and I currently serve as an MWIS Advisory Committee member. Mariah Mitchell was an American astronomer and stalwart advocate for the inclusion of women in higher education. On October 1st, 1847, Mariah discovered a telescopic comet and quickly rose to fame following her prodigious achievements. In 1865, Mariah was the first appointed faculty member and director of the observatory at Vassar College. She firmly believed in learning by doing and always reminded her students of their capacity to make the same achievements as their male counterparts. Today, the Mariah Mitchell Association preserves Mariah's legacy through maintaining her birthplace and papers, astronomical and natural science research, and interactive hands-on educational programs for all ages. In 2018, I attended the first MWIS, where we devised strategies to support women in STEM at all stages of their careers. At that time, I lacked confidence in myself as a young scientist and doubted my place in STEM. However, I was deeply inspired by Meg Airy's talk on current statistics of women and girls in STEM and the panel discussion on the future of women and girls in STEM. It was conversations like these that encouraged me to continue pursuing a research career in astronomy. Simply put, the first MWIS reminded me of my capacity to achieve anything that I set my mind to. So it is with great enthusiasm that I introduce the MWIS co-chairs, Gwyneth Packard and Joe Santucci, who will describe today's program in more detail.
Thank you very much. It is a real honor to be welcoming you to the 2020 Mariah Mitchell Women of Science Symposium. We would like to begin with a land acknowledgement and recognition of the importance of understanding the long history that has brought us to reside on this land and understanding our place within that history. Land acknowledgements do not exist in a past tense or historical context. Colonialism is a current ongoing process, and we need to build our mindfulness for our present participation. We acknowledge that our planning and organizing for this event was done on the traditional and unceded territories of the Mashpee Wampanoag people. The Wampanoag people are still here, still working to steward their land, and still proudly preserving their cultural traditions. Since the arrival of Europeans in Massachusetts, non-Indian governments have broken agreements and steadily stolen land from the Wampanoags, but we celebrate this summer's legal victory of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe to maintain their lands in trust. We invite you to learn more about the further requirements for protecting tribal lands for the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe by visiting the tribal website. And so we bring you the second Mariah Mitchell Women of Science Symposium. I attended the first symposium and it changed me. In addition to the talks, we had a mix of salons and poster sessions and coffee break socializing, which we can't offer this year. But we are working hard to bring it to you the next time we can safely gather in person. We're hoping that with this virtual gathering, we can give you a taste of that experience. I say it changed me, and that is no exaggeration. It was at the first Mariah Mitchell Women of Science Symposium that I found my voice. I realized in hindsight that it was the first professional meeting I had ever attended where I didn't just understand at a logical level that I had a place and could contribute, but that I actually felt like I belonged. And I was able to carry that feeling back to the places I work and start to decode some of the signals that contribute to the sensation of unwelcome. It was being in that first symposium dedicated to Mariah Mitchell's legacy of hands-on learning and discovery that I discovered how to finally relax into my own role in my own STEM pursuits and could more effectively share that to help others with their STEM goals. The speaker and panelists we've invited here today are accomplished women who are advancing STEM in numerous ways through different professional sectors, different disciplines, different paths, and all of them experienced in outreach to bring others with them on their journeys. I'd like to thank our generous sponsors, the American Astronomical Society, Novartis, and the Tuppence C. Harris Foundation of 1986, who stepped in to support this new format so that our speaker and panelists could share their experiences with you, and we can all be together today virtually learning together and building this community that Mariah Mitchell envisioned to support women in STEM. And now I'll turn it over to my co-chair, Joe Santucci.
Thank you, Gwyneth, and good afternoon, and thanks to all of you for joining us today. Like Gwyneth, I am honored and thrilled to co-chair this symposium. I'm on the board of directors at the Mariah Mitchell Association, and I vividly recall the time 3 years ago when Jason brought the concept of holding or supporting a symposium forward. I thought it was a brilliant idea and something that the Mariah Mitchell Association should wholly support then, and I continue to believe that that's true. In getting ready for today's symposium, I told Jason that I wanted to open my introduction with and close it with a quote from Mariah Mitchell. The first quote I selected is one of my favorites, and I think it's one of Jason's also. Mariah said, I quote, "The habit of travel once adopted cannot be easily given up." How right she was. The pandemic has certainly shown us that. It's painful that we can't be all together in person in Boston, and it's difficult to be able to not do that. But thanks to technology, we have this substitute. And I know it's going to be a terrific event today, and that's due mostly to the hard work of Jason and Gwyneth and our speakers and panelists, so I thank them. When hopefully we can meet in person next fall, it's going to be because of someone like you. It will be a person of science who allows that to happen. Only science is going to be able to defeat the coronavirus. You know, I'm confident that there are women like you in laboratories around the world trying to come up with a vaccine or a cure. Perhaps never in our lives has the field of science, a field that Mariah Mitchell devoted her life to, been as important as it is today. What all of you do is critical at this time. But you need to be able to do that on a level playing field, and hopefully the symposium will aid in that endeavor. I want to read a couple paragraphs from an article that appeared in yesterday's Daily Labor Report. And I read these not to depress you, but to challenge you. So here goes. It's from an article entitled, "Women Who Helped Pull U.S. Out of Last Recession Now Fall Behind." The pandemic is disproportionately affecting women and threatening to wipe out decades of their economic progress. As the crisis drags on, some of the biggest pain points are among women of color and those with young children. These setbacks, characterized by some economists as the nation's first female recession, stand in sharp contrast to the dramatic progress women made in the expansion following the last financial crisis. The jobs, income, and promotions that women lose as a result of the coronavirus could hold back economic growth and sideline an entire generation of women. We cannot let that happen. We have to work together to make sure that that does not happen. You have to continue to look for opportunities to mentor one another. You have to look for opportunities to advance each other's careers. So someday I'm hoping that we can look back on this last quote I selected from Mariah's, which is, "Does anyone suppose that any woman in all the ages has had a fair chance to show what she can do in science?" We know Mariah believed that that was not the case. Hopefully in the not too distant future, we can say the answer is yes, that they have had that opportunity and that many have. I want to thank you again, enjoy the symposium, and lastly, remember to get out and vote this fall.
Thank you, Joe. And yes, everyone, please vote. And now it is my privilege to introduce our keynote speaker. After she speaks, we will have a Q&A session, and you can submit your questions for that anonymously by going to web.hui, that's whoi.edu/cdi/MMWSS, and pressing the button that says Ask Catalina a Question. And I believe someone did post that in the chat, and it was in your email. So Catalina Martinez is the Regional Program Manager for the NOAA Office of Ocean Exploration and Research, OER. with an office on the University of Rhode Island Graduate School of Oceanography campus. She is a certified diversity professional with 3 graduate degrees from URI, a master's in oceanography, an MMA in marine affairs, and an MBA. Ms. Martinez began her ocean science career with NOAA in 2002, working on ship operations and logistics, as well as education and outreach initiatives associated with expeditions. She has spent many years sailing on research vessels as expedition coordinator for NOAA Ocean Explorations and Research, and as regional liaison for the program. Ms. Martinez also works on a variety of local, regional, and national efforts to address the barriers to entry for underrepresented individuals in STEM fields, and for over a decade has been honored with numerous awards for this work. Most recently, Ms. Martinez was honored with the 2019 Women of Color in STEM Diversity Leadership in Government Award for demonstrating sustained leadership in creating a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive federal workforce. Ms. Martinez is currently participating in a 6-month detail with NOAA's Office of Inclusion and Civil Rights, working on a variety of efforts to help expand their diversity, equity, and inclusion portfolio. Please welcome Catalina Martinez.
Well, thank you so much, Gwyneth. I am deeply, deeply honored to be here with all of you today. And I specifically really need to thank Gwyneth for inviting me to speak today. She got in touch with me about a year ago, and we've been working toward this incredible moment together for quite some time. And I really would love to also thank Jason for all her hard work getting us to this place. So I'm going to apologize up front. I have 3 screens going. I have 2 computers running. My work computer decided not to work with Zoom today, and so I'm just going to be a little awkward in the way I'm either addressing you, the camera, or looking at computer screens, but please bear with me. So as you just learned a little bit about me, I am very, very fortunate to be working for NOAA, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about my journey and how I got to be where I am today. And I really hope that the topics that I'll address with you today, and hold on, I'm going to start screen share. So the sense of belonging and intersectionality, I hope that these topics speak to many of you in the audience. I believe they probably will. They certainly are deeply ingrained in myself. And I hope that this helps pave the way for a really engaging dialogue with our panelists later on. So as you heard, beyond my ocean exploration opportunities and the work that I do for NOAA, I've also been really fortunate to build out a portfolio in the diversity, equity, and inclusion realm that is near and dear to my heart. It's also a lived experience. And so I have been doing this work a lot out of necessity, as many of us do, but also because I'm just very passionate about it. So the first thing I would like to do is get us acquainted with a software program that I'm going to work with you on. If I can get this to change. Oh, there we go. So if everybody could open up a browser, what we're going to do is I'm going to try and make this as interactive as possible. So we're going to use a 2-browser scenario. Okay, so if you could go into a browser and type in, polev.com/CatalinaMart841. If someone could type that into the chat box, that would be helpful. So I'd like to just take a few minutes and let you get acquainted with the Pole Everywhere software. And what I'd like to do is to make this interactive. So I know that this is a really challenging time for everyone. And so I wanted to do a check.
Catalina, you just went mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry. Okay, so what you'll do is you'll go between the Zoom browser or the Zoom screen and a browser where you're going to be answering the questions. And I think everyone's getting that. So you get to see the answers as they come in real time. So I wanted to check in. I know that these are extraordinarily challenging and stressful times. Many of us are isolated and have been for months. Some of us are possibly traumatized by what's playing out in the country, from fires and floods to deeply rooted and justified social unrest, an upcoming monumental election, yes, please vote, and of course the global pandemic. These are just to name a few. Some of you might be frontline workers in our audience, and thank you to those of you who are. You might be juggling small children, homeschooling, or caring for others at home. You might be juggling all sorts of things at these really stressful times, and you might also just be full of gratitude like I am every day. I'm so fortunate to have been working from home in a very safe space for the past 6 months or so, and I will be for the foreseeable future. I'm very thankful. So I thought a quick check-in would be really helpful. And what I want you all to know while I'm giving this presentation, I know it can't be, I can't see you all and you can see me, and that's a little bit awkward, but although I can't see you, I want you to know that I hear you, and I'm gonna try to hear you through this live polling software, and more than that, I feel you. So yeah, we've got a lot of stress and tiredness and anxiousness. People are exhausted, introspective, so many things are happening. So please know that I hear you and I feel you. And so now I'm going to go back to the presentation. So let me know, can you see my slide?
Yes.
Great. So what I'd like to do first is begin with a brief introduction of who I am and how I got to be talking with you all today as we begin our discussion around identity. We all tend to prejudge people based on appearance when we have no additional context. Bias is a realization, not an accusation, right? We all have them. And I'll guess that when you look at me through this Zoom portal, you have particular ideas about who I am or where I come from or how I got to be in this place in life based on what I do for work and what I look like. So let me tell you a little bit about myself, and we'll see if these things match up. All right. Trying to get my slides to move forward. Oh, easier way to do this. Let's see. Oh, there we go. So it's often said that who your parents are has as much or more to do with where you will end up in life than any other single factor, and I believe that. The social and economic structure a child is born into dictates access to opportunities and resources at all levels, including the quality of your education and thus your future prospects, right? It carves out our identity and it determines our access as well as our chances for success. And as we're all well aware, life circumstances are inherently unequal. So many of you may relate to the fact that I didn't have a direct path to the field of ocean science. There were certainly some twists and turns along the way. So in short, I grew up in a very traditional Cuban family who was rather nomadic because they were in the horse racing business. So we moved around a lot when I was a kid based on where racetracks were open and closed seasonally. At some point, we settled in Providence, Rhode Island, as a central location for this New England racing circuit. And I mostly lived with my Cuban grandparents who did not view education as important for girls, only for boys. So this is a photo of my grandfather, Armando Martinez, and he was a jockey, as you can see here. I was kept home a lot when I was a kid to take care of my sick grandmother and to take care of the family in other ways. And maybe some of you in the audience, this might be familiar in your families as well. So I didn't go to school a whole lot past the 7th grade. Thankfully, we lived in a very diverse community, as you can see from this childhood photo. And if you can't guess which one is me, I have that awesome yellow plaid suit on. I'm rocking it. So this fabulous, diverse community we were growing up in, I got to see that there was more out there for girls in the world, and hopefully then more out there for me as well, than what I could see within the own very limited perspective of the gender roles within my family and my own Cuban community. So not surprisingly, I dropped out of high school at the age of 16 and was completely self-supporting and in my own apartment from that point on. Somehow, I always knew that I needed an education to increase my earning potential, even though I didn't really have the language for it at that time, so that I could improve my circumstances. So I started the long road to obtaining the education of my choosing, right? So I had a lot of different jobs through the years, and I didn't obtain an undergraduate degree until I was 30 years old. There were a lot of obstacles I had to overcome. I had to work really hard, several jobs at a time, while I was chipping away at my education. I spent several years working in direct human service related jobs, and I also became a people collector. I consider myself a professional people collector. And I learned to build family out of community. And I did that wherever I went, and I really can't stress enough how important that has been in my life, how important it really is to surround yourself with good people who are going to champion you, people you trust and connect with. That has remained important to me throughout my whole professional and personal life. Once I started college at the University of Rhode Island, I continued my education until I was satisfied. As you heard, I have 3 graduate degrees now, so that's 4 degrees from URI. It might be a record, I'm not sure. But I always felt a little bit like I snuck in the back door, and this image really speaks to me. I look like I just, got away with something. So all of my degrees are from the University of Rhode Island, and there are many reasons for that. First of all, I felt so fortunate to have worked my way up to be able to attend a university like that. I never in my wildest dreams thought I could attend URI. And so being there, it was such a gift. So I love URI, but mainly all of my degrees are from URI because of my particular life circumstances and family obligations. I was taking care of my mother my whole life, and I couldn't really leave. And some of you may also see that within your own lives. And while I was in graduate school studying oceanography, I applied for this amazing fellowship called the Sea Grant John Knaus Marine Policy Fellowship. And maybe we have some alumni in the audience. Knaus Fellowship has been around since the 70s. It is a gateway like no other. I am so fortunate to have been able to obtain that fellowship. It's really a bridge to opportunities and a professional network that allowed me to build a career. I've been with the same office for 18 years based on this fellowship. I started with the Office of Ocean Exploration in 2002. They hired me, and I've been able to build a career with them. I've been really, really lucky. So I'd like to go back to the poll if we could, so that I could understand how many of you are surprised by my background? So I'm going to go back to the poll. So does my story, my identity, my journey match your preconceptions? Could you have guessed that I was a Latina, or that I came from urban poverty, or that I experienced cultural oppression? Or that I was a first-generation professional, or that my family circumstances limited so many things, including my life choices and options, my mobility, and thus my future prospects, as well as my academic and professional options. Very interesting. Very interesting results. Okay. So we can come back to that later. I am going to go back to the presentation now. So our identity is complex, right? It's multifaceted, and it creates a sense of self, of who we are and how we exist in the world, as well as how we perceive others. There are many influences, external, internal influences, and how we self-identify may differ considerably from how others perceive us. Some facets of our identity may have significant effect on our life options or how we're treated, right? Some may offer advantages, and others may even provide for wealth and other types of advantages, right? Some may result in disadvantages or maybe even oppression or abuse, right? Our multifaceted identities are inextricably linked and can compound impact. And intersectionality as a function of identity is a term coined by a scholar, Kimberly Crenshaw. She was a US lawyer and civil rights advocate. And when she was at a loss for a term to describe this sort of compounding intersection of our identities 30 years ago, for her, it was a tool to describe how discrimination against different facets of a person's identity can overlap and impact their lives, right? Contributing to unequal outcomes in ways that can't be attributed to one dimension alone. She centered Black women in her analysis to dissect the ways in which race and gender were treated as mutually exclusive categories with problematic consequences within feminist theory at that time, as well as anti-racist politics and anti-discrimination law, which is what she was focused on. I was extremely intimidated to talk about intersectionality for this presentation, as I am not a scholar or expert in this realm at all, but there are several key scholars to learn from if you're really interested, and I'm sharing two of those leaders in the field today. So Kimberly Crenshaw, obviously, and also Patricia Hill Collins, who investigated the various uses of the term over time. Crenshaw explains that intersectionality is a lens through which you can see where power comes and collides, where it interlocks and intersects, where social dynamics come together, creating challenges that are unique and compound impact, right? And we see this in our daily lives. We're experiencing it, in real time, even if we don't think of it in those terms. Here we see in 2020, while white women in the United States earned 81 cents for every dollar a white man earns, the same figure for American Indian, Alaskan Native, Black, African American, and Hispanic women is 75 cents, right? And some of the very special challenges and barriers and issues that women of color experience were outlined pretty well in this 2014 report aptly named Double Jeopardy, the prosecution of a person twice for the same offense. These are just a few of the themes that ran through the experiences of those interviewed for this study. And as our audience today is predominantly female, many of you may readily identify with certain items on this list. The issues and challenges for women and groups historically absent from STEM fields, such as Latinas, African Americans, Pacific Islanders, Native Americans, and other indigenous groups, are compounded. And since we come from groups who are historically excluded from, especially from these higher positions, but often hold lower skilled labor positions in US society and the workforce, sometimes these barriers can seem insurmountable. We also see intersectionality play out in real time in devastating ways with the pandemic and with groups disproportionately impacted by police violence, right? And we've all learned a great deal about the impacts of intersectionality from the body of work our beloved Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was a warrior on this front for women and other marginalized groups. And how you self-identify matters, right? But so does how others perceive you. Although I may envision myself in particular fields or doing particular things, if I'm not represented in those spaces and places, it's hard for me to get there, and even harder for me to believe that I can belong there. And even if I'm one of the fortunate few who does get there, do I have a sense that I truly belong? And is that based on internal factors or the environment or both? I personally believe that we need to get away from the term imposter syndrome and stop putting the onus on the individual. We all know that when we feel that we don't belong, it's typically because the environment, the culture, doesn't embrace us. I'd love to see a shift in this mindset and begin calling it what it is, imposter environment. And from the words of a great friend who I stole this slide from, the fish might be sick, but it's your water that's nasty. So I'd like to go back to the poll and try and get an understanding of whether those of you in the audience have ever felt that you don't belong in a professional space or place. Has it ever happened to you? Do you feel as though you belong everywhere you go, or no? Do you own every space you walk into, or do you have to look around the room and identify allies and assess the environment that you're walking into and what you're bringing to the table that might be perceived in a particular way? Sometimes we feel gaslit, right? We can't really tell. What's really going on here? Is it something about me that's causing this to happen? Is it something about the space that I'm in, the people who are in that space? Do I have allies? I always find this very interesting. So we see this coming in real time. Yeah, a lot of people feel a lack of sense of belonging in the spaces that they're in STEM, especially women, right? And especially people of color and women of color. And then what does belonging mean to you? If we can stay in the poll for a minute, you can type in short answers to this one. What does it mean to belong? Do you feel a sense of community there? Do you feel a connectedness? Do you feel that you have any influence or voice in that space? What does it mean to you? Is there a power dynamic that comes into play that makes you feel or not feel that you belong in a space or place? Is there a particular type of narrative that causes that to happen? Yeah, respected, safe, valued, thriving, absolutely. Being heard, right? Having a voice and people actually hearing you, feeling safe in that space, that's so important. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Feeling confident, right? Yeah. Recognized as an equal, whoo! Yes, not having to explain yourself. Being comfortable, yeah. Yes. Sometimes we're hyper invisible and sometimes we're hyper visible, right? Depends. Yeah, supported in vulnerable moments. My goodness, do you even feel safe enough to have vulnerable moments, right? Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all for sharing all of this. I know it's not easy. It's not easy. And now, I'll go back here. So the sense of belonging, I work with an amazing man named Brian Dewsbury here at URI who studies the sense of belonging for students and specifically students of color in STEM fields. He teaches inclusive pedagogy. And he would say that belonging is the degree to which you feel connected to a community and feel that you have power to shape the culture, dynamic, and narrative that that community engages in on a daily basis, right? This is, he sort of encompasses sort of everything we were talking about. And now, what are the impacts when you don't feel a sense of belonging? go back to the poll, and let's talk about that for a minute. You know, what are some of the impacts? What can happen to you professionally and personally when you don't feel safe in a space, when you don't feel that you have trust there, that you have allies, that you might have a voice or power, that you can be vulnerable, that someone's going to listen to your ideas? What happens? You're reluctant to contribute, exactly. You're not going to ask questions, you might give up. What happens when that happens? You know, do you feel like you're bringing your whole self to the table? Are you bringing your whole self to work? Not contributing to the conversation, missed opportunities, right? Missed brilliance. If you're shutting yourself down, then your brilliance can't share, you can't share your brilliance, right? Withdrawal, absolutely. You contribute less, you don't speak up. You don't advocate for others maybe either, right? So your ability to champion others gets suppressed. You're isolated and alone. Absolutely. You can't give of yourself. And then what happens when you always have to tap into that emotional and intellectual capital in every space you walk into? Now you can't use that capital for problem solving, for, you know, publishing, for getting your work done. You're always carrying that extra burden. You lose your self-confidence. Peace out. Absolutely. You stop talking, right? Absolutely. Social withdrawal. And that's going to impact your health, your productivity, your ability to advance in your field, all of those things, right? Lose your motivation. Yeah, it's inefficient for the agencies as well if you can't bring all yourself to the table. And now, what are some of the experience that might happen for in-group, out-group dynamics? Now you're in the in-group. What happens when you do feel a sense of belonging? How might that really contribute to your ability to advance in your profession, to be healthy and happy, to increase earning potential and wealth, safety, for you to champion others, right? For you to have the emotional and intellectual bandwidth to truly contribute in those spaces and places that you're in. You feel energized, your creativity abounds, right? I have an idea and I'm gonna share it because I trust that you're gonna hear me. Yes, you get recognized, right? Motivation, now you can use your power to amplify the voices of others as well, true. More creativity and confidence. You're happier, you're healthier. You're not overthinking everything you do. You might not have to really assess the room when you walk in. You know that you're being heard. You achieve your goals, you contribute to your field. Sense of control, strength, and confidence, right? All of these things, you're empowered, you're active. Thank you so much for sharing all of this. Gain more confidence, absolutely, absolutely. So in STEM, right, we know, let's see, yeah. We know through our own lived experiences that these things are real, right? And I'm thankful to a group of scholars, Rainey and her colleagues, who published a great article a few years ago, ground truthing what we knew to be true, right? Validating our lived experiences about how belonging relates to persistence of students, and specifically women and students of color in STEM academic programs. And her key findings were that sense of belonging significantly impacts our persistence and success, particularly for students of color and women. Women experience a lower sense of belonging in comparison to men. And when race and gender intersect, both men and women of color reported a lower sense of belonging. It's not surprising, right? And white men were most likely to report a sense of belonging, whereas women of color were least likely. And that makes total sense. You know, if you're part of the dominant culture, you're the ones who are getting championed. People have affinity bias. It's natural, right, to group with like kind, to support those who are like you. That's the way that the world works, and we understand that. So I was thankful that this article came out that allowed us to have scholarship around what we knew were our lived experiences, right? Sorry. And what are some of the factors that can contribute to your sense that you belong or don't belong. And there are a long list of these things, and we could sit here all day talking about these things, and I won't do that to you. But we know that relationships matter, relational experiences matter, right? Self-recognition, having a science identity, but also peer recognition, getting that recognition from your peers that you're there on merit, right? When they tell you that you're only there because you checked 2 boxes, you know, I checked the Latina box and the woman box. That's not the kind of recognition that you need to build your science identity. You want to feel that they believe you're there on your merits, right? That you're competent, and that, you know, the climate and the environment that you're in is conducive to your success and your happiness and your health and your contributions, as well as those of everyone else who is there. So diversity matters. Mentorship, having people who you can build a professional network with, who are going to champion you, who you can also champion, so that as we're moving forward in our lives and we're moving up and we're learning, that we can also lift others, so that we're lifting others as we're climbing and moving through life as well. In order to have that kind of bandwidth and to have that kind of behavior and thought process, we have to be in a space where we feel safe, where we feel supported, where we feel that we belong, right? And representation matters, critical mass. Otherwise you feel demographically isolated, and that, you know, the exclusion, the marginalization comes with that, a big, big part of that, right? And bear with me, my computer is doing crazy things. So what I'd love to do is go back to the poll and think about what you can do, right? What can you do to either develop your own sense that we belong in the spaces and places we want to be, or build bridges to belonging for others? We're all driven and motivated by something. The motivation tends to help us develop resilience and strength, sometimes through sheer determination or maybe even spite, right? But something tends to be the driver. How do you build superpowers that will allow you to be resilient in these spaces? Throughout my life, my drive came from the need to increase my earning potential, to get myself and my mom out of poverty, and I knew that I had to educate myself to do that. So somehow, with my really limited perspective, I was determined to get an education and not let my circumstances or my family dictate that for me. So learning to overcome significant adversity, and I'm sure many of you in the audience have had to do that. It leaves you with certain gaps, of course, but it also provides for a really special perspective, right? Those of us who experience it early in life have a tendency to view obstacles as detours instead of barriers, and that realization can really propel you through life. So for me, learning to build family out of community, collecting people, and opening doors for others, those are some of the superpowers that came from my lived experiences. What about you all? Yes, sharing your experiences, making others feel empowered and welcome, spreading kindness and being a catalyst, giving lots of love and support, right? So an incredible young woman that I met a few years ago in a Job Corps program once said to me, she had been homeless for some time. And she said, Catalina, it's not what's on you, it's what's in you. She had been homeless for years, and because of what she had been through, she had this superpower of resilience that I just found phenomenal. She was a really courageous problem solver, I learned, and she really walked toward her fears, and she walked directly into unknowns. Those were incredible superpowers that came from her lived experiences. And those are the kinds of things that you can use to lift others up, right? So look at all this, lots of coping mechanisms. What are some of the things that we can share with each other? And I want you to know that I believe a report will come out of this, or some kind of documentation, and I can share everything that you all are sharing with us through this portal. We can print out as data, so we can share all of these things with each other. Yes, willingness to be an ally. Oh my goodness. Making others feel comfortable and taking leadership, not giving up, right? We have to stand up and speak up, not for. We need to amplify the voices of our sisters and our brothers. And now, what are some of the skills and resources and opportunities? What can you do to help others? What are some of these resources you might be able to share? And again, we're going to share all of this together when we're through here with this symposium. So do you have any resources and skills and abilities that you might be able to share here that we can share with others as well? Mentorship, absolutely. Particular opportunities, any kinds of particular programs that you know of that might be useful to help gain these sort of tools to build resilience in these spaces and build a bridge to opportunity and to sense of belonging for others. Absolutely. Skype a Scientist. I love that program. I've participated. Self-care, guidance on how to navigate difficult conversations and conflict resolution, right? Yes. Cultural change, yes. Your experience in the academy, yes, absolutely, absolutely. And so while we are sharing these wonderful opportunities, I'm going to get back to, I know my time is marching forward. So what I'd like to do now is just leave you with a few thoughts. I don't want you to, you know, when we're through here, you don't need to really remember who I am or what I've done. Think about your own infinite potential in your spaces and places and the personal power that you bring into those spaces and places. We're all a gatekeeper of something, right? And we need to make sure that we're lifting others up as we move forward, that we're lifting as we climb so that we help others navigate the challenges that we've learned how to navigate ourselves, right? Help them get to the spaces of influence and power and leadership so they can be the wave of change so that our sense of belonging becomes natural instead of a space we have to create for ourselves, these safe spaces that don't always exist for us when we get there, right? So I'd like to leave you with a few challenges. So build your personal resilience by collecting your people. I never could have gotten to where I am in my life without this incredible circle of people that I always surround myself with. I believe that that is a skill that we have to hone. We have to learn how to collect the right people and let go of those who might be holding us down. That's not easy either. And I tend to look for people who are championing others so I can learn from them how to do it well. And so that I can embody that myself, right? And if that's the kind of person I want in my circle, in my tribe. And make sure that you learn to self-advocate. We can't wait for others to advocate for us. I know that that's really uncomfortable. We have to walk toward our discomfort in these spaces. You have to self-advocate and build bridges to inclusion for others, right? So as we said, lift as we climb. Always make sure you're surrounding yourself with good people and be intentional about championing others, right? Use your personal power of deliberate thought and action to make a difference. And with that, I just want to thank you all for allowing me to be here today. I'm so deeply honored. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Catalina. I wish we could hear everyone clapping. That was lovely. I would like to open it up to questions from the audience at this point. Again, there is the link in the chat for web.hui.edu/cdi/mmwss. These are anonymous. And we have, the first is not a question, but a confirmation. When you said snuck in to URI, they felt that way their whole life. And they said, when will they find out what happens then?
Oh my goodness, I'm always terrified. When are they going to realize I don't really belong here, that I snuck in? Yeah, but that's right. That's part of our internal dialogue. We have to change our narrative at some point. You know, that's the imposter syndrome versus the imposter environment. Why am I, you know, the exception and not the rule, right? That's not okay. And at some point we have to hope that there's enough voices of difference, people who didn't take a really clear trajectory to get to where they are, that we don't feel so isolated, right?
Right.
I hear you, I feel you, even if I can't see you.
I liked you talking about the difference between imposter syndrome and imposter environment. I know that after the first symposium, I was able to look at the signals of unwelcome differently. So instead of having to defend my reaction to myself, which was a massive energy drain, I was able to come at the situation the same way I would if I found a sharp piece of metal in the conference room carpet. You know, of course it hurts when you step on that. And it's in the best interest of the entire team to try to move it and address the damage that it can cause to anyone who would step on it. But more often I have to engineer ways to not have to walk there because I can't actually move the thing.
See, that's a superpower, Jason. I mean, you figured it out. You figured it out. You're building superpowers.
How should we address environments that make us feel uncomfortable or as if we do not belong?
It's not easy. There's going to be a lot of them. And it doesn't get easier when I don't know if you're in a workforce or in an academic space. It doesn't get easier. I've been in nowhere for 18 years and I still enter spaces where I don't feel I belong. As long as you're choosing to be in a space where you are somewhat other, right? Where you are not in the dominant group, then you're going to have situations like that. And the reason I talk a lot about superpowers in building community is because that's how you build your resilience. You know, community is your resilience. Joining affinity groups, right? Joining employee resource groups. To me, that was a huge way for me, and I still do it professionally, and take leadership roles in those spaces. That's how you make sure that you have your network of support, because it may not always be there for you. And you can try to address, if there are some heinous issues in your spaces, learn what your rights are. You know, we all have particular rights, but also know that when you go into an HR office, when you go into the Equal Employment Opportunity Office, those are compliance spaces. So their job is really to establish compliance and protect the institution. So if you're going to figure out how to protect yourself in those spaces and you want to persist there, you have to build resilience. And so you have to learn from others and collect your people. That's the best thing I can imagine taking out of that.
That blends nicely into the next question, which is, what do you think is the most important thing for people with privilege to do to help minority scientists feel welcome in academic spaces? And I think we could apply that minority to anyone who doesn't have privilege in a particular equation.
Absolutely. You know, if you've ever been a true ally or a true mentor, you know that takes courage, right? So that means you have to use your privilege for good. You're wielding it like a tool, maybe even sometimes as a weapon. And it takes courage. It takes bandwidth. So you have to be ready to stand up and speak up, but not speak for, you know, to walk beside this person, not to lead in those spaces. You have to amplify the voices of the voiceless and find ways to do that while you take the back seat. So it means humility. It means being humble. It means really doing your own internal work, because we all have challenges in that. If you are in a position of privilege, that means you probably are a gatekeeper to something. You may have a position of power, and you're going to have to view that relationship differently, right?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Speaking of being humble, one of our questions is, I see one person constantly bragging, I'm so honored to be over and over on LinkedIn, and wonder when it's bragging, when it's self-promoting, and when it's self-advocating. This person says, I'm reluctant to do this myself. So how do we promote ourselves in a healthy way?
I had this conversation just yesterday with a brilliant young woman that I mentor, and I mean, she is a rising superstar in her own right, and she has a hard time self-advocating. And just for an example, she published a children's book. She got this huge award at the same time as she got a promotion. Like, all of these amazing things were happening for her simultaneously, almost in the same week. And she felt embarrassed, you know, and that is just it crushes my soul to know that. And she wouldn't speak up for herself. She wouldn't admit it. She wouldn't tell people about it. And, you know, I embody that myself. I totally understand. We feel that because being humble is a valued characteristic, and I don't know who put that comment in, but for women especially, we believe that being humble is a valued characteristic. Believe me, that does not exist in the dominant culture space, right? We embody a humble existence because to us it's a valued personality trait. It isn't a valued personality trait everywhere. And so you have to do what you're comfortable with, but I implore you to please get comfortable with self-advocacy, because nobody's gonna do it for you. Unless you have a particular champion or you have a particular community who can amplify your voice. And I can tell you, we do this for each other. I have extremely strong friendships with people in different spaces and places who help amplify my voice. We write each other up for awards. You know, that's the community you have to surround yourself with. But I implore you to get comfortable with self-advocacy.
That sounds like a great intermediate step, though, is finding a partner who can boost your signal, and you can boost each other's signals.
Yeah, because sometimes our direct supervisor or, you know, whatever in that kind of a space, our partner in that space might feel in some kind of way intimidated or, you know, have some kind of a problem with the fact that you're doing so well and may not amplify your voice. So you have to sometimes look outside of your immediate environment for those champions.
That was something that I have noticed in the past, is that when I do particularly well at something, I get more negative feedback. There's pushback sometimes, yes.
Well, they feel threatened, and that's a real, you know, human experience.
Someone said you showed a slide about how women, and in particular women of color, are underpaid compared to men in equivalent positions. Do you have any advice for negotiating for salary and benefits with a supervisor? And they specify potentially a white male supervisor, but I think we've seen that even members of the non-dominant group can take on some of the, I'll call them punishing characteristics of the dominant group. So I think this question applies regardless of who the supervisor is, unless you know that they're a champion or an ally.
Well, what we do, I am in a lot of different mentor programs, formal and informally. I mentor all the time, and we help people navigate those conversations. You have to go armed with information, right? Make sure that you know all of your rights in that space. Make sure that you understand the equivalent pay scales. It's easy in the federal government. That information is pretty public. In private institutions, not so much. So all of that is also part of your network. You make sure that you've built a community of people you can tap into for this information. So we help each other navigate those conversations by arming each other with information. You have to go in with data. You have to go in with information. You have to know, you know, what is the pay range for a person of my skills, abilities, position, you know, grade, level, whatever it is, whether you're in federal government, state government, private institution, academia. You do your research. So go in with enough information that you know what you want. Don't just go in thinking I want more. Know exactly what you want, right? And it's not an easy conversation, again, for us to have, because we often will embody a humble personality characteristic where we don't feel like we can ask for something. Know that that is happening with the dominant groups, right? So how do we start to embody that ourselves?
Excuse me. When talking about your history, at one point you said you were, quote, lucky. I feel that way a lot, but it's not just luck, right? We worked hard to get where we are. Why don't we see that?
Absolutely, and I do see it. I use the term lucky a lot because, again, I'm the exception and not the rule. You know, I have two other sisters who did not make it the way I did, right? In my family, women were oppressed. So I always feel fortunate because I found a path up and out, not just out. And some of that is the community that I was in, particular journey that I took based on a lot of influences. So it's not luck per se, but I still feel lucky. I worked really hard. I surrounded myself with the right people. Did I ask the right questions? Maybe I didn't have a particular characteristic that held me down even more than one of my sisters, just for example. So I always feel that there was a bit of luck there. But of course, I am a scrapper. I stand where I am today because of the people I've surrounded myself with and because I worked hard and asked maybe some of the right questions.
Someone says, if you could change any widespread standard policy that exists in STEM to improve the environment, what would it be?
Wow.
You get one.
One. It's like the one wish.
Right.
Peace. What would it be? In STEM, huh? There's so many. I do a lot of barriers work. So we look at process and procedure. So this is what I've learned recently. Maybe this will help me identify what that one thing would be. So I do a lot of work on process and procedure. So we assess what we can assess that's tangible in, say, a fellowship or a scholarship application process, right? We can take the tangibles and look for the barriers to entry for groups that are underrepresented. And because I come from those groups, I intersect at several of them, I can flag those barriers to entry pretty easily. And that's not the biggest challenge. For me, the biggest challenge is changing the hearts and minds of the deciders, the hearts and minds of the gatekeepers, the people who implement those policies and those practices, right? Because they can still implement them in a biased way. So if I could change one thing, it would be a whole scale shift in the hearts and minds of the gatekeepers, for them to finally embrace change, embrace diversity, embrace difference, value it, and make sure that they're working every minute of every day toward it, right? And not feel threatened by having to share power, by having to share, the leadership. So I would change the whole scale hearts and minds of the gatekeepers.
I think that's a great one, because we do see that sometimes people think if we affect this one policy here, or if we put the one magic job posting on the one magic bulletin board, that we're going to solve representation or inclusion. And what we really see is that it's having a lot of little conversations. It's injecting this lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion into the decision-making points. All of them as a layer. This should be another criteria through which we look, right?
Absolutely. I mean, if the first slide I often start with when I'm talking about the barriers work is, diversity is essential, but it's also a choice. It's just a choice. You choose to do things differently and you'll make a difference. Through your your mindset, you'll change your actions. And in order to do that, we have to change the hearts and minds and perceptions of those who are in leadership.
This person says, I do not know if you have had personal experiences with this, but I often struggle heavily with my mistakes. If I fail to succeed at an educational setting where the fault was mine, I struggle to recover and will start reinforcing negative thoughts of not belonging, self-doubt, and guilt. It seems to me that all of the people I look up to have been perfect in this sense.
Oh, honey, I'm giving you a COVID hug right now. COVID hug, COVID hug. No, we all fail. My goodness. I am driven by terror, right? Fear of failure. I'm driven by that always. And no one's going to be harder on you than you. That is a reality. and I'll tell you, that quote from that young woman who was homeless, who I met in the Job Corps program, it's not what's on you, it's what's in you. I want you to hold on to that. That gets me through a lot. I am so hard on myself. I totally understand where you're coming from, and we have to give ourselves grace. We have to be kinder to ourselves, because no one is going to be harder on you than you. So please, I remember someone put into one of our polls, self-care, practice self-care. We all make mistakes. How could we ever grow and learn and become who we really want to be in life if we don't fail? Failure is how you learn, right? And I have failed at so many things. I worked in direct human service before I studied ocean science. And boy, that's a kick in the pants every day. You're either going to feel really full, your soul will feel really full at the end of the day, or you're left sort of sobbing, feeling that you made a big mistake. That's how we grow and change, but please be kind to yourself. Self-grace, it's not what's on you, it's what's in you, because what happens to you doesn't define you. It's how you respond to it. Get back up and keep moving forward while you lift others up around you. That's what defines you.
Absolutely. I can relate, though, to the feeling. I was so terrified of failing that I couldn't watch television that everyone else enjoyed, like The Office, because the mortification humor would trigger me. I would get anxiety from watching other people be awkward. Or
I have a hard time with that show myself. I get it.
So the idea of failure or being awkward or in any way, quote, messing up, very, very difficult to get to this. But I think when you have this place of belonging, you recognize that your slip up is not a threat. And then you can try more things, knowing that if they don't work, then you've gotten closer to identifying the solution, right? So part of it comes back to belonging and knowing that that failing isn't a threat to your very existence.
No, but you made a really good point there, Gwyneth. Our mistakes are amplified when we're in a space where we're the other, right? Our mistakes are amplified. The repercussions for those mistakes can be amplified. That's my fear of failure often comes from the environment, right? Whereas, a person from a dominant culture, the whole mediocre syndrome, they can be mediocre. We have to be excellent. We have to win every award, because I was told I wasn't there on merit, the whole time I was in academia. I'm often, told that in spaces that I still enter. So it's amplified. It's amplified. And I feel you. I absolutely feel you.
That's all the time we have, but there is one question I want to encourage the asker. It says, how do I get connected with a mentorship program? Where do I find them if my institution does not offer them? And I would like to encourage you to please reach out to us directly so that we can try to hook you up with some resources. And that ends this session. We're going to go into a 5-minute break and then reconvene for our panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, attendees of the 2020 Mariah Mitchell Women of Science Symposium. It is with great honor that I introduce the moderator for today's panel. I met our moderator at the first Mariah Mitchell Women of Science Symposium in 2018. Through the generous financial assistance of the Kennan Institute and the Mariah Mitchell Association, I was able to attend this amazing symposium and partake in thoughtful conversations with other women in science. One of the most inspiring moments of the symposium was when we were placed in small group discussions. I was fortunate to be in the same small group as today's moderator. I was amazed and inspired that as a biracial woman in engineering, a field where women of color are highly underrepresented, she was able to overcome obstacles, microaggressions, and persevere through it all. Her journey in science began at Pennsylvania State University, where she obtained her bachelor's in physics with honors. Through physics, she discovered oceanography
and went on to earn a joint master's from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. She continued her education, pursuing graduate-level computer science classes at Harvard University. Her career has taken her to far and fascinating places, such as Labrador, Greenland, Tasmania, and Antarctica. Her work on oceanographic data took her to a career in computer science. She worked in industry writing software, but eventually returned to apply her software engineering experiences to ocean exploration and robotics. Her work revolves around an autonomous underwater system, where she specifically focuses on improving vehicle decision-making, increasing the vehicle's self-perception, survivability, and the vehicle's ability to adapt to its environment. I am also inspired by the moderator's dedication to actively build diversity and inclusion in the marine sciences. Back in 2018, I listened intently to her share the ways she is partaking in community outreach and finding ways to increase the number of women in STEM. This is exemplified through her involvement in various organizations such as South LA Robotics, Museum Institute for Teaching Sciences, MIT's Cape Cod Summer Institute, and the local Girl Scout troops. And now, please join me in welcoming today's moderator and co-chair of the 2020 Mariah Mitchell Women of Science Symposium, Gwyneth Packard.
Thank you very much. Today, our panel members are 4 women leaders whose careers span several sectors: industry, academia, nonprofit, government contracting, and government. The Mariah Mitchell Association has brought us together to discuss ways in which our work speaks to Mariah Mitchell's legacy of encouraging, supporting, and mentoring women dedicated to the advancement of STEM. We're going to discuss some of the unique challenges that face women in STEM and the solutions required to push past those challenges when additional barriers are in place. Mitchell was all about hands-on learning for women pursuing exploration of the natural world. And today, we hope that our stories will offer strategies to build the supportive structure needed to address systemic barriers for women in STEM. We as individuals have to find places where we can be our whole selves. Too often as women, we encounter the double bind of not having people in our home life who can understand our work fully or fully appreciate our enthusiasm for it, and at the same time not having people at work who know how to engage us in our personal interests. So to find places where you're free to fully express your energy for your professional and personal pursuits is really powerful. So those are some of the thoughts I'd like to explore. Let me introduce Dr. Sarah Hoagland, Dr. Amy Bauer, Doreen Price, and Sabina von Sungbusch, and have them each tell you something about how their path intertwines with STEM. After they share their stories, I'll ask some questions before opening it up to the audience again. Remember, you can submit your questions at any time by going to web.hui.edu/cdi/mmwss and completing the form for panel questions this time. Again, that is web.whui.edu/cdi/mmwss. Our first panelist today is Dr. Sarah Hoagland, Liaison Officer and Biologist with the USDA Forest Service. She has been doing this research for nearly a decade, and now I'll turn it over to Sarah.
Great, thank you, Gwyneth, for the introduction. Hopefully you all can hear me. If not, please stop me. But thank you so much for being here today. I'm really honored to be on this panel with such phenomenal and accomplished women. This is really truly a rock star group today, and I feel truly empowered just to be amongst such great individuals. So thank you so much for the invitation. I'm honored to be here. It is kind of a bummer though that we all can't gather in person. I feel like I do a lot better in those one-on-one and in-person environments. So for me, this is a little bit of a struggle, but regardless, I'm happy to spend this time with you all. I will put a note that maybe it's actually a good thing that we aren't meeting in person today, because at 6 a.m. this morning when I went to go feed my dog and let her outside, she didn't quite come back as fast as she normally does. She ran back inside, extra giddy and excited, and sprinted around my house. And within 4 seconds, I realized what had happened, and she had gotten sprayed by a skunk. So I reek really bad. So right now I have a really nice like COVID barrier that's going on. I can't let anyone in my personal space because I smell this. It is impossible to get out. So my poor dog got that this morning. But Gwyneth wanted me to share just a little bit of an introduction to sort of who I am and talk a little bit about my story, my path into STEM, and sort of my upbringing, my employment, my career, and things like that. And then I'd like to finish on a little bit of my core values. So with that, I actually might try to do something a little creative and share my screen really fast. If I can try to do this and do in presentation mode. Let me see if this will work from the beginning. All right. Can you all see that? This is what I look at my screen. I love wildlife. That's what I study, so I get to look at that. All right. I just was really drawn to Catalina's story and how she introduced herself, including her family background. So I actually grabbed this real fast. This is me from my hunt, actually 2 years ago. I hunt back home on my reservation in New Mexico. But I wanted to start with sort of, these are the women in my life that have been a significant role to me. My mother is there on the left holding a little stuffed animal. My maternal grandmother is right next to her in the white dress. And then my great-grandmother is next to her. And then my great-great-grandmother, Dora Pacheco, is there. So there's 4 generations there in that photo. And I really like that image because, one, I want to share, so my grandmother, she's there in the white dress, she was born and finished a bachelor's degree at Northern Arizona University in education and in business back in the late 40s. And this was actually before Native people and Native Americans could even vote. So she was by far like a huge pioneer in my family's history. And then my mom subsequently went off and got her master's degree from Chico State in criminal justice. And then coming down to me, I received my PhD in forestry from Northern Arizona University. So this was truly a generational process in the making, and I just give a lot of credit to the strong women that are in my family. And I'll close this out and stop sharing. All right, so a little bit about my path into STEM. I did a bachelor's. I started out as a math major because I thought I wanted to be a math teacher. And I truly struggled once I got to Calculus 3 and physics and all those other challenging courses. And luckily, at that time, I was able to reflect back on kind of my childhood and the things that I wanted to do as a kid. And that was all around studying wildlife and being outdoors and caring deeply about the environment. And so luckily I transferred over to ecology and systematic biology. And I'll never forget my junior year, as I was in my undergraduate program, I went and met with my ACES advisor. And ACES stands for the American Indian Science and Engineering Society. And I was sitting in his office because I kind of had this idea of what going on and getting a master's was like. And because I had seen the TAs in my class, and I thought, I might want to try to do that. Like, that seems like something I might want to pursue. And so I asked my ACES advisor, how to start the process of going to graduate school and getting a master's degree. And he point blank asked me, well, why not a PhD? And up until that moment, I had no idea really what that meant or what that would entail. And I think that sort of set the groundwork in me, even having the mindset and the confidence to pursue an advanced degree, because he thought that I was capable of doing that. So fast forward, I ended up going to UC Santa Barbara for a master's in environmental science and management. And then obtained a position with the USDA Forest Service, and through one of their science recruitment initiative programs, I was able to get a position with the Southern Research Station, and the Forest Service helped me go back to school and finish off a PhD in forestry. So I'm calling you all live from northwestern Montana. That's where I live today. I work at the Rocky Mountain Research Station Fire Lab, as Gwen had mentioned. In our office here, just a little bit down our hallway, we have the world's largest internal combustion chamber. So we run all kinds of fire behavior studies, looking at the effects of fire and the effects of fuel treatments on forests, and for me, more specifically on wildlife populations. But my other duty station is based just north of Missoula on the Flathead Indian Reservation, which is home to the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes. And I work at Salish Kootenai College there in the wildlife, forestry, and hydrology department, where I work on recruiting Native students into STEM and into careers and help allow them to consider graduate school opportunities. And then I also continue to conduct tribally relevant research. So that sort of describes my work and my path. And I guess I'll just end here by saying some of my core values. I really appreciated being able to quickly share my screen and talk about my family, because for me, that's by far the most important thing in my life. I also have core values, including things like community and responsibility and respect. And so that responsibility piece, maybe I'll just end on this and hand it off to the rest of our fantastic panelists here. But I truly feel a sense of responsibility to take care of the landscape. I had mentioned my family, my upbringing, but my family's from the Pueblo of Laguna, which is outside of Albuquerque in New Mexico. And we have a 500,000 acre reservation there that's we hold sacred. And there's a big sense of urgency to protect all of our landscapes, not just our reservations, but in general, the land that we still have. So I have that deep sense of responsibility. So with that, thank you again so much for having me here today. I'm really looking forward to all of our questions, and I'll hand it back to Gwyneth. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Our next panelist is Dr. Amy Bauer, Senior Scientist and Chair of Physical Oceanography Department at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. She has been conducting her research for over 30 years, and now I will hand it over to Amy.
Hello?
Amy, we can't hear you yet.
Oh, I see. Okay,
Oh.
I think I'm, okay. Is my camera on?
Not yet. There we
That's
go.
weird. Oh, now it is. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Over to you.
Thank you. I think I had an internet dropout there just as you were finishing up. So thank you very much, Gwyneth, for the introduction. And it is also an honor for me to be here and talking with you today about my experience as a woman in oceanography. To give you a little bit of background about how I got to this point, I grew up in a small coastal town in Massachusetts, Rockport, Massachusetts. And I don't know exactly how this evolved, but just from a very young age, I remember being very excited about the natural world. I do credit my mother for a lot of that. She also is very interested in nature and the outdoors. And we, as a family, did many outdoor activities together, and also visited the nearby Museum of Science frequently, I'd say several times a year. And that became a real favorite destination for me. I also developed a real curiosity about how the natural world actually works. And again, I can't explain that. Maybe it was just in my DNA from the beginning, but I just always was interested to learn, how does that work? What is that about? Why does the moon go around the way it does? Anything, especially about the physical world, physical environment, especially weather. Weather was a big, I was very interested in weather as a hobby when I was a kid. Some say, I say it was because I was always interested in the snow forecast for the next day to see if school would be canceled. I also can, I think, credit Rachel Carson a bit too for my interest and enthusiasm for the environment. My mother was a big fan, so she was in our house. Rachel was part of our household in a way through her books and her real pioneering work for the environment. In high school, went to a small public high school, and I had a couple of teachers who I resonated with, a math teacher and a physics teacher. They both were encouraging to my pursuits in academics in those fields. So I decided to go to Tufts University and study physics as a major, not really understanding then what the breadth of the physics discipline entailed. I just knew, well, I liked it in high school and I did pretty well and I sort of like math, so seems good. But I found out relatively within a year or two that many aspects of physics were not all that interesting to me, like the electronics, so-so. Definitely not quantum physics, just didn't float my boat. Sorry if there's anyone out there in the audience who does that for a living. Go for it. I just didn't, it didn't catch my attention. But then I started learning more about fields in sort of physics of the environment. And that primarily came through my experience with Sea Education Association. SEA runs a semester-long program for undergraduates that covers everything to do with the oceans, the science, oceanography, as well as maritime literature, history, as well as sort of marine policy. So I did that between my sophomore and junior years, and that's where I was introduced to the field of physical oceanography. That where I could combine sort of my enthusiasm for, excitement, and interest in the physical environment with my training in physics and math. So after Tufts, I went on to graduate school. I did a summer internship actually while I was at Tufts, and then went on I did the summer internship at the University of Rhode Island, Graduate School of Oceanography, and then decided to attend graduate school there. And I really loved it. I got a chance to go to sea on research expeditions a lot as a graduate student. And I loved grad school so much that I spent 7.5 years there getting my PhD. I didn't see why I'd move on. It was this great life. I didn't have very many responsibilities of family at the time. And I was really enjoying the adventure of going to sea and studying my dissertation topic. But about 2 years into grad school, I got thrown a curveball. I was diagnosed with macular degeneration and retinitis pigmentosa, both of which are degenerative retinal diseases that follow a somewhat predictable but not 100% knowable course that can lead you to near, if not total blindness over years, not overnight, but over years to decades. So this was devastating news to me. I was in the middle of pursuing this exciting career, education towards a career. I was very gung-ho, And then I find out I have this inherited disease, and I thought, I'm done, I'm finished. I really, I didn't know a single blind person at that time in my life, and I certainly didn't know any blind scientists. So I had no idea what to do, how to proceed. Luckily, at that time, I did meet a low vision specialist who was extremely positive. And he said, Amy, there's so much new technology coming down the pike. We'll find something to help you make it work. So I saw him annually for many, many years until he retired. And he was always the same, a great supporter, enthusiastic, pointing me towards technology and adaptive and assistive technologies that would help me continue in my career. So, and my attitude about that, because there aren't too many trailblazers in this, with this particular affliction in science, a few though. My attitude has been basically just take one day at a time. There was a lot of opportunity to fret about the future. What if I lose my vision more? What if I lose it more and more and more? What will happen? You know, I'll be done. What will I do? But I said, that was not proving to be a healthy attitude. So I said, all right, let's just go one day at a time and we'll see what happens. So I did pursue and still pursuing my career as a physical oceanographer at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. And mainly in a sentence, what I do is I seek mostly federal funding to investigate unknown phenomena in the oceans, especially related to ocean currents. And I seek funding to carry out these investigations. And then if I'm successful, I do carry them out. I go to sea sometimes, or some members of my team go to sea. We make new observations and we try to piece it together and figure out how the ocean is working. And specifically, I'm interested in some of the deepest currents in the ocean, which are part of the Earth's climate system. And we're trying to understand how those currents are or may change, are changing or may change in the future as a result of global warming, which I'm trying out new nomenclature. I'm trying to get people to take on a new phrase for that. Since global warming can sound sort of attractive to New Englanders in the winter, I'm trying to get people to use the phrase global flooding, which is probably the most immediate and one of the most consequential effects of climate change that we're going to experience in the next 100 years. Okay, so about 10 years into being at WHOI, I met my husband, David, and a couple years later, we adopted a daughter, Sarah, from Guatemala, and we became instantly a multiracial family, and which was not easy to be in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, where Woods Hole is. Which is, I don't know, something very high fraction white. So we and Sarah had our struggles with that throughout her time here. She just recently started as an undergraduate at the University of Hartford in Connecticut. So you might have questions about how does one do science research with little or no vision. And I'll tell you, if you figure it out or you find out, let me know, because I'm still trying to figure it out day by day. I tried to hide it for a long time. I was able to do that. Can you still hear me, I hope?
We can still hear you.
Oh, good. Okay. Okay. I just got a text message and I thought that was maybe Gwyneth telling me, you're on mute.
Nope, it was me telling you a couple minute wrap up. Yep.
Perfect. Perfect. Okay. Thank you. I did try to hide being visually impaired for a long time. My vision was somewhat minimally impacted at the beginning. And I was so afraid that someone would turn around and say, Amy, you can't do this. It is physically impossible for somebody with this disability to be a scientist. I was so, even though nobody has ever come out and said that to me, I was afraid that would happen. So I hid it for a long time. I wouldn't use my white cane. I sometimes put myself in a little bit of safety compromise because of that. But eventually my vision deteriorated to the point where I had to really come to terms with it and embrace it and be more open about it. And what a relief, I have to say, to be able to be myself that way. So technology has advanced a lot over the 30 years I've been in the field, and adaptive technology in particular. My computer reads to me everything I read and type, which just makes a big difference with what's called a screen reader. I had to seek out mentors from well beyond my local network because there just aren't that many scientists who have a significant vision impairment. And I did find a few very accomplished scientists who happen to be blind, and I really benefited from their counsel. I also got but through it by asking my institution for accommodations. And they were like, I was surprised at first, now I expect it, that they were extremely accommodating and were forthcoming with money to purchase adaptive equipment, with services, with assistance, to help me pursue my career here at Woods Hole. And for that, I am very grateful. The only other thing I would say that brought to my, helped me to get where I am is persistence and perseverance. Just kept on plowing forward, even when it seemed impossible. So that,
Thank you so much, Amy. Our next panelist is Doreen Price, IP Counsel for Brookhaven Laboratories. She has served as Chief IP Counsel for over a decade, and now I will return it over to Doreen.
Well, thank you very much, Gwyneth, for the introduction and also the opportunity to be on this panel with everybody and to share in the experience today for the symposium. There have already been so many, great sharing of stories and topics that I related to, the idea of being able to be what you want to be, working together, sharing stories, but as far as my story goes and how my path intertwined with STEM, how I kind of got started, I initially thought of the role models in my life, starting with my parents. And I will also attempt to share my screen and see if I can share a picture of my parents. There they are. And that's actually my niece at her quinceañera. And we also have a very multiracial family for many generations. And then also other role models. Actually, in my office, I have professional journals, two in particular that I keep prominently displayed in my office. One on the cover has a picture of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And I just add this piece here because I thought this was interesting. I admire her very much, of course, as a woman and all of the work that Justice Ginsburg did to support, anti-discrimination on the basis of sex. And as well, the other journal that I have in my office has got on the cover a picture of Justice Thurgood Marshall, who provided a lot of support in the courts. With respect to anti-discrimination laws and on the basis of race. But this one in particular struck me because it says here that one day before our nation lost Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she had discovered a little gem in her high school folder, relics from 1970s. And basically this is just a clipping where at the high school level, it prominently displays Title IX as a new program. All right, now I'm going to try and stop sharing. Okay. So, with that, the other role models that I kind of grew up, I remember reading a biography about Madame Marie Curie. And as I was in high school, I also remember in particular my junior year high school chemistry teacher. And that's where I really found my love of chemistry. I really enjoyed so much studying that subject matter. And my teacher in high school for chemistry was a young woman. And so being a junior in high school, a lot of us students, and I went to an all-girl high school, by the way, we really felt like we could relate to our chemistry teacher and had a really great time. So at that point, I kind of knew that when I went to college, I wanted to study chemistry. So I had that kind of decided in my mind, but I had a lot of interests at that time. I was also very involved in music. I played the violin, did a lot of work with different orchestras, a lot of rehearsals and that sort of thing, and was also thinking about maybe going into music. But ultimately, I did decide to do the sciences, but I didn't know what I was going to do, in terms of a job or what my life's career would be like with chemistry. I just knew I wanted to study chemistry. And so when I went to Binghamton, which is called Binghamton University now, and I got my bachelor's in chemistry. And while I was getting my undergraduate degree, I did some independent studies with a Professor Yanauer in analytical chemistry, and we did a lot of research. Our research was focused on the funding that he had at the time through NASA to study activated carbon resins for the disinfection of water. And so I would have the opportunity to speak with Professor Yanauer and talk about, my enjoying studying chemistry and doing that work, but not really knowing what I wanted to do long term. And also while I was in undergrad, I was taking some courses in philosophy of law. A lot of people at that time said I was quite argumentative. I like to argue, hopefully in a constructive way. And so Professor Yanauer introduced me to patent law. And my parents did not graduate college, so I was the first person to, and I'm the oldest in the family, so I was the first one to go to college and graduate. And so this concept of patent law was completely new to me, but it sounded perfect because I would be able to continue to work in the sciences, but then also kind of marry that or bridge that together with my growing interest in the law. So the other little nugget of information that Professor Yanauer shared with me was that it would be helpful if I got a graduate degree, not necessarily in the sciences, but in some diverse area like engineering. So that would allow me to be able to practice patent law in more diverse scientific and engineering types of technologies. So I kept that in the back of my mind, but I think as Catalina was mentioning earlier, kind of the finances needed to be attended to. And so one of my primary goals after graduating Binghamton with my bachelor's was to really secure a job and make some money. And so I was able to do that. I got first initially a contract position at DuPont. And as I mentioned, I went to Binghamton University. I ended up staying in the area, which is usually referred to as the southern tier of New York. And DuPont had a facility down in the northern tier of Pennsylvania that I went to. And that was about an hour's drive. That was the first of many hour commutes for me throughout my career. But I was able to actually carpool with a couple of folks, the employees at DuPont, and that was a very good experience. And the chemist that I worked for, Jim Joyner, he was an interesting person as well. And he was very welcoming. I have to say, throughout most of my career, I've worked with individuals who were very open and very welcoming. And so that's been a big help along the way. But he used to have the to-do list at the beginning of the day, and he would say, if you only get one thing done on the list, your day is complete. So he always kept it quite light and cheerful. And of course, he got everything done on the list, but it was always a pleasure working with him. And then after, since it was a contract position at DuPont, I kept looking for, full-time employment. And so I was able to actually get a position as a staff scientist, again, in upstate New York, at Procter & Gamble Pharmaceuticals. And at that time, they had taken over a former pharmaceutical company in Norwich, New York, called Norwich Eaton Pharmaceuticals. And so I worked there initially in their QA stability department, and then I moved into what they had called an advanced technology and validation group, where I worked on method validation using basically translating manual methods of testing over to robotic and automated methods of testing the pharmaceuticals. So at that time, I was also, since I got the position at P&G, they had education benefits, and I was able then to go back to school and go back to Binghamton, and I studied industrial engineering in the Watson School of Engineering at Binghamton. I did my classes at night, I worked during the day. Long days, but again, when you're motivated and excited about the work that you do, the days go by quickly, but definitely long and tiring. So when I completed my master's degree in industrial engineering, I felt at that time if I was going to go to law school and kind of pursue my dream of patent law, that I would have to kind of take that chance, take a risk, and go full-time to law school. I really believed firmly that I didn't want to go part-time or go to night school for law school. I wanted the full law school experience. I believe to this day, the movie Paper Chase is still the best movie that shares the experience in law school. And I had watched that, and like I said, I was full on. I wanted to have that kind of an experience. So I did. I was able to attend Albany Law School of Union University and did that full time, and it was a great experience. Again, these are decisions that you have to make all along the way. I had other opportunities, for example, to go up to New Hampshire, to Franklin Pierce, which is actually a dedicated patent law school. But again, I wanted the more full, legal education. And so I think that was, a good and right choice for me at that time. Following graduating, and actually while I was in law school too, I had the opportunity to do internships or clinical programs at Albany. That's definitely one of the strong points about that law school. And all right, I see that's time. That went very quickly. So I'm going to wrap up. But essentially, at the law school level, I was able to work at the Department of Environmental Conservation. So I just mentioned that primarily because I was, like I mentioned, a person who had a lot of different diverse interests, and it was kind of difficult to make one choice, because when you choose one path, you kind of close the door on others. But I believe that, it's helpful to have a whole host of opportunities, take advantage of them as they come along. That's always one thing that my grandmother had said: never let an opportunity slip through your fingers. And all that, I will close. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doreen. Our final panelist today is Sabina von Sungbusch, Vice President of Validation and Clinical Affairs at Siemens Healthcare Diagnostics. She has been with Siemens for nearly 30 years and in her current leadership position for the past 6 years. And now I will turn it over to Sabina.
Thank you, Gwyneth. Can you hear me okay? Just a quick yes? Awesome, yes. Thank you. And thanks to everybody that went before me here, Doreen, Amy, Sarah, and of course, Catalina. Great presentations. I'm already just deeply humbled to be the last speaker here. So first off, you may hear from my accent, I'm not American born, I'm German born. I was born in Munich, Bavaria. And yes, right around this time would be Oktoberfest. Not this year, of course. And I'm looking sort of in general at my co-speakers here, the non-STEM woman in science, even though I consider my background scientific as well. So I'm by education a political scientist, and via my corporate career, I'll go into that briefly, ended up being the head of validation and clinical affairs in the lab diagnostics business of my company, which is now deeply involved, obviously, in developing tests for COVID, which is probably the most scary and amazing part of my career at the same time. But let me just go briefly back where I come from. In preparing with Gwyneth a little bit in the beginning, I said, in some ways it's full circle. My whole family, especially from my father's side, are in natural science. My grandfather was an acclaimed biologist. My father is an astrophysicist / computer scientist. One of my uncles is a biologist turned corporate executive. My aunt was a mathematician. Her husband was a maths professor, and I could go on and on about the whole family, basically. And I was sort of the black sheep and the rebel that said, nope, I don't want to do science. I want to do all sorts of things. And that's sort of one of my mottos in life has been try something new every now and then. Although I have to say the German translation sounds a lot more fun. As a teenager, my interests or my future career goals were as diverse as I wanted to be a builder of wooden boats, because I started sailing when I was 10 and I still love it. If it wasn't for a bad network connection, I would be doing this call from our boat where we live at the moment. So I wanted to be a boat builder, but then I realized that that's kind of hard. So I decided that that might not be it. Then for a while, I wanted to go to Latin America and fight the revolution there. That also didn't really pan out. Then I wanted to become a journalist and then a psychologist. None of this really went into play, but when I went to university, I studied political science. And you would think that that then ends up in one of the careers that I had mentioned before, but I ended up actually through an internship that I got right after I finished college. In Germany, many times you end up with a master's right away. So I had a master's in political science, and I got an internship with the company that I still work with Siemens. But I started in corporate communications, and just because I don't want to bore you with too many details, so the steps from there were corporate communications, communications marketing, business development, sales, project management, audit, again back to project management, but project management and R&D, and then I got offered the position that I have now. So you kind of ask yourself, talk about intersectionality, how do you do these steps? And to me, I go back to my motto in life: try something new every now and then, and listen and learn a lot. Again, in the prep session with Gwyneth, I remembered a little bit the very broad education that you get as part of the educational system in Bavaria. And as much as I hated it at the time, because I had to take a lot of subjects that I wasn't particularly interested in, I think later on it enabled me to learn and listen to other people and really get a feel for what new subjects or new careers could look like. And I've been very fortunate to do that throughout my career with the same company that's given me new opportunities regardless of where I wanted to live and whichever field. Obviously it's not always the ideal career step, but it's something that worked on really well. Obviously though, when you work in an engineering company, Siemens is an engineering company throughout, as a non-scientist or non-engineer, that's not easy. Put on top of that, you're a woman, that's even more difficult. And if you then, like me, have a sort of minority background, I'm a lesbian, that makes it even more difficult. So I couldn't hide the fact that I was a woman. I also couldn't hide the fact that I was not an engineer, but I hid the fact that I'm a lesbian for a long time in my career. And that certainly wasn't, very helpful in me being the full authentic self that I wanted to be, and it hindered my career for a while. Did want to add that once I moved to the States, the first step was in Seattle. I had the opportunity to do an executive MBA program at the University of Washington, which helped me later on in my career as well. Got me quite a bit into these more general management type positions, like business development and also audit. But I have to say, again, not to try to be too long here, for me, probably the most rewarding part of my career has been where I am now. To work in a part of the company in healthcare diagnostics, in lab diagnostics, and certainly now, where we live through the worst pandemic in a century, to be part of a company that develops the tests, tries to do everything possible to help our customers, to help our partners, to help patients, to get to faster tests, better tests is an enormously fulfilling experience. And to do that with a team that's very diverse we have lab technicians, we have clinical affairs specialists, that, you know, some work at the lab, work throughout the lab, throughout the COVID experience here in New York. And the other 50% or 60% of my team has been virtual like me since March 11th. And it's been incredibly, you know, rewarding to do that. So, you know, just keep in mind, wear your mask. The pandemic is not over. And I'm going to hand it back to Gwyneth for the question and answer session, I think.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to remind the audience that after we've had a discussion around 3:30, we're going to open it to the audience for questions. And again, you can go to web.hui.edu/cdi/mmwss and press the button to ask the panelists questions. You can choose to address it to a specific panelist. All of the panelists can now turn on their cameras and mics, and we'll move into a discussion. I want to just recap some of the takeaways I've heard. Persistence, taking on new things, taking on new challenges, whether that be, in Amy's case, what the diagnosis was going to mean that particular day, or whether it was a professional opportunity. But being willing to take on the things you didn't know you could do, and having people to look up to, those role models. I heard all of you mention the people who were encouraging you as children, and that's so important to maintain as we move forward, having someone encouraging us now. For the first question, to start the conversation, I want to touch for a moment on the recent loss of Justice Ginsburg. She once said, referencing her children and her work, "Each part of my life gave me respite from the other." Because women, whether or not motherhood is involved, are expected to fulfill so many roles, how do we manage balancing our different responsibilities to provide us peace rather than frenzy? Can you each please speak to how you find that balance? And I'll start with you, Sabina, since you're still up on my screen.
Thank you very much, Gwyneth. And I appreciate the little bit of emotion that I heard there. I share that emotion. I want to first express my thanks to Justice Bader Ginsburg for giving me the right to marry the woman that I love. Sorry for that. And so I just, back to your question though, we don't have kids. I don't have this extra or split burden of working and children. I think for me, trying to build a relationship where both of us contribute to any part of our lives. I share a lot of my business challenges with my wife, and that's very important to me. For the private side, I think what is incredibly important for me is to find moments. I'm an introvert. For me, actually, the virtual working is incredibly helpful. But usually, what is important for me is to find the balance of something that's outside of being in the business environment. I think some of my co-panelists will appreciate the sailing part of my life. That's the moment I step on a boat. I'm free and my mind is free, and it goes into other spheres, and that's something that I think is extremely important. And whatever the other value is, pursue it, because the balance is more important than the 150% of the focus all the time on the job.
Thank you. Amy, can I call on you?
Sure. Yeah, I don't know if my camera's on or not. I can't.
It is.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. Yes, I found it interesting. There's an implication in the question that it's not frenzied. And I guess my experience has been as a parent of one only, but still a very high maintenance kid, that it wasn't frenzied. It's pretty frenzied. And it was was a wild ride. How I got through it, it's the same way I've gotten through gradual vision loss, which is more or less one day at a time. Certainly having a supportive partner has helped a great deal on both the vision front and the parenting front. But yeah, it has been pretty frenzied, I have to say. So maybe, yeah, maybe I'll just leave it at that and let the others instruct me, maybe.
I'll just jump in here because I loved how you described that. It's frenzied. Yeah, we're all like somehow managing such chaos in some ways. And, you know, part of me feels like, well, sometimes it's okay to feel like it's just so overwhelming. But sometimes I also think, well, this is what makes fun or life fun and unpredictable and challenging and dynamic, like being thrown, like my dog getting skunked this morning. Like these are all these things that end up leading to stories and your character. But when I feel like I can't get that balance, what helps me is to just have a little bit of gratitude and like a deep breath and think, okay, well, it could be worse maybe. Or like, I'm just thankful for my health, the health of my family. The sun keeps shining every day. I can get water out of my sink. Like truly, like there are so many things to just be grateful for. So whenever I feel overwhelmed, I just try to be more grateful or help somebody else out. I notice if I just send like an old friend, like, hey, hope you're having a good day, or how are you doing? Or just reaching out and saying something positive to somebody else, it almost like gives me that energy back. And trying to just keep perspective on things. And I think I'm a big advocate for having humor in life and have a little bit of fun. And, you know, for me, the thing that I try to do to keep me balanced in work is I play a lot of volleyball. And so I have a great community of friends that I get to play volleyball with. Not so much right now, but boy, we have a good time and it's a great release to just get re-energized. So those are my comments. Thanks.
Thank you. Doreen, did you want to chime in before we move on to the next question?
Well, I think a lot of what has been said has been, as I say, spot on. And I do the juggle. Yes, I guess it can be frenzied sometimes, but yeah, I think when you have other activities, you know, be it the volleyball, I've just, again, started redoing martial arts. I have my music, you know, those types of things. Whatever brings, you know, that freedom that I think Sabine mentioned as well, you know, getting on the boat and you just have that release and you let everything go. But going back to what Justice Ginsburg was saying about the children versus the work life, I do also find that when I'm at work, I'm motivated because, you know, I'm supporting my family. So not only am I motivated to do my work because I have a passion for it, but it's also, you know, this is what I do to, you know, provide, you know, a house and clothes and food on the table for the family. And then when I'm with the kids, you know, probably more so when they were a little younger, but even now as they're over 6 feet tall, you know, when they walk in the door, you know, they brighten my day. And those are the gifts. These are fundamental gifts, you know, precious gifts, you know, that you have. And there are, you know, so many other examples of gifts, like, you know, Sarah was saying, that you just, you gravitate and you latch onto those and you kind of, I guess as they say also, you accentuate the positive to eliminate the negative. So that's all I would say.
Thank you. Yeah, it sounds like when we can use our home life and our work life to allow us to focus on, to get relief when either gets overwhelming with the task list or the details, that you can remove yourself from that problem set, as an engineer might say, and work on, put yourself in another frame. One thing that we did talk about was wanting to take some really solid solutions away from this session together. And so I wanted to talk about, it's my understanding from the research that employee resource groups are an effective tool for helping institutions foster inclusion. And so I wanted to ask you each what your experience is with either formal or informal groups in the places that you have worked. And Doreen or Sabina, I'll start with Doreen, because I started with Sabina last time, but I know both of you have rigorous, formal employee resource groups at your company, well, at the lab and the company. So I'll open that up, and then we can move to what might exist in the forestry or at Hui for that sort of support.
Okay.
So,
Yeah. So, right, at the lab, we do have what we call ERGs, you know, for a whole host of different sectors. And I have not actually been very active in, so the one for African Americans at the lab is called the African American Affinity Group, AAAG, primarily because I've been quite busy with work that I do. However, also in part, coming out of law school, I mean, we had what we call BALSA was the acronym for that, the Black Law Student Association. And there was a lot of, yeah, kind of infighting, I guess is the only word I can kind of come up with. So, you know, a couple of friends or few friends of mine, you know, that experience, I think, really yeah, left a little bit of a bad taste in our mouth. And I wasn't so anxious, I think, to kind of jump into another group and get involved. And as it turned out, like I said, I had other distractions. But I am beginning currently now to engage with them. And I have, you know, periodically, like I said, I've been at the lab actually now for 13 years. So I have, you know, touch base. I know plenty of people involved in the group. And I do, you know, and some of the comments earlier, you know, even here today about the role that the ERG has in helping people, you know, that are in these kind of groups feel like they belong. And, you know, and then I had shared with you, Gwyneth, when we spoke, like, I don't have that feeling. And, you know, the concept or the idea that maybe I would if I actually got involved in the group. So I put that out for anybody who might shy away, as I have, that might be a missed opportunity that you take, you know, advantage of for those that are here today, and that I'm beginning to explore that as well for myself.
thank you. Sabina, can you talk about the extensive network at Siemens?
Sure. So Doreen, I absolutely appreciate your comments. It's interesting because you know, I'm probably quite far on the other side. So I'm the co-chair of our U.S. Diversity Council for the last year. I've been involved in ERG work for quite some time, and I would say that again, you know, coming out only about 12, 13 years ago at the company, having the Pride ERG there, knowing that that was fully supported and knowing that the management team was behind that was a huge part of me finding the courage to do this. It's not an easy step for many gays and lesbians and bisexuals, transgender and whatever else. And to know that there's a group that is supported. It's not so much that it has to be a network, but that there's an openly supported, management team supported ERG that's there is incredibly important. And the network, of course, that it puts together as well. I would like to add one thing. One change sort of an approach that we've done over the last 2 or 3 years is that we ask the ERGs to be a lot more of a strategic partner for the leadership team, especially over the last 3 to 4 months. Our African American group has gotten extremely involved in our efforts to make racial equity a bigger part of who we are. We have a long way to go. I don't have to hide the fact that this is a white German company. But I think working together and finding ways to support specifically certain minorities that are such a big part of our customer base, of our supplier base, and we understand and want to be more like them, and that you know, our ERGs help with that tremendously. So I'm a big supporter, and I try to get them more involved as much as possible.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Amy, did you have anything about how groups work at Hui, or?
Sure. Yeah, a little bit. I just going back a few decades when I was a junior researcher at WHOI, the ombudsperson at WHOI at the time made a concerted effort to get at that time, relatively limited number of women scientists together on a regular basis for a monthly coffee. And I benefited a lot from that. Seeing that there were a few senior women ahead of me who had really blazed the trail. That was really big for me. Another thing I wanted to mention, as far as the blind and scientists or blind community, we're a pretty rare breed, and I had to go outside my workplace to find mentors and other individuals, an affinity group, so to speak. So that's all been done by email and telephone. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, sort of more on the now it's my turn to offer, is a program that a good friend and colleague of mine started called Empower, mentoring physical oceanography, physical oceanography women to increase retention, which is about 15 years old now. And if anyone is interested in how an affinity online kind of or all remote mentoring program can work, you can check that out online, mpowir.org. And I've been involved in helping to set that up and being a mentor leader for young women in physical oceanography. But there's nothing particularly unique about physical oceanography that the concepts in that structure could apply to anywhere. And then I guess the last thing, because there's so few people with disabilities in STEM, I've tried to reach back to students and K through 12 through a program I started called Ocean Insight. And most of that outreach has been with the Perkins School for the Blind. And again, this hasn't been rocket science, basically just trying to put myself in front of them and show them that they could be like me. They could have a career in science just like I have. And the fact that they're blind or visually impaired isn't a showstopper. So that's just a few quick examples.
Thank you. Sarah?
Yeah, sure. I'll just say a couple of things. So I, like Amy, also had to go outside my employer to find, I guess, what we're calling employee resource groups. For me, I call it sort of an ally group to navigate through this nasty water. I loved how it was presented earlier, but I see this as just building your professional family. This is really people who will advocate for you. And for me, it was groups like I had mentioned before, the American Indian Science and Engineering Society, which is the largest organization of Native STEM professionals. Then there's also the Native American Fish and Wildlife Society, which I spend a ton of time with now, and then the Intertribal Timber Council. So for me, those were my little employee resource groups. And again, I had to go outside my employer. My first job with the Forest Service, I was working in New Mexico, and I was a wildlife trainee, and I didn't have any of my direct line of supervisors weren't women. I had other women on the crew with me as wildlife, seasonal employees. And then even transferring into the Southern Research Station, not to bash on them too much, but truly there were no other women scientists in my unit. And boy, that was, it just makes it kind of hard to feel like, okay, well, can I do this? Like somehow something's wrong here, right? And so, yeah, I guess it just, those groups were really helpful for me. And I will too say that over time, like I'm kind of feel like I'm at this early career phase still, just finished my PhD 4 years ago, but it's getting better. I'll say that. Like my sense of belonging is maybe increasing with the confidence, and it's slowly changing. And like now up at the tribal college, I totally have this sense of community. So I've got other natives there at the college as faculty, and then students too. So I definitely have that sense of place. But thanks, Gwyneth.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's really good for people in our audience to hear that all of you, with all of the accomplishments you have, all of the seniority, you still struggle. Well, I won't put the word struggle on you, but you have each mentioned experiencing not feeling like you belong. You've all told me that logically in your minds that you belong in your spaces, but you've all had that sensation of not feeling like you belong. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Yeah. I think it's good for no
understatement.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's nice to know that that is manageable. That it is not imagined, that it is, as Catalina pointed out to us, coming from our environment, and that we are reacting in very reasonable ways to some of the stimuli that we receive, some of those indicators of unwelcome. I think it is time to open to the panel questions. And let me just go. And I see actually Catalina just popped back on for a second. Catalina, would you like to speak to that last?
Sure. What was the question?
I just wondered if you wanted to speak to that last bit that we were talking about the sense of belonging, how even after all of these years, all of the achievements, the accomplishments, the seniority, to experience that feeling, that sensation of not belonging, how valid that is, and how, I don't know, tell us why that's not terribly depressing.
Panel. Wow. And as well, look at yourself, Gwyneth. I mean, you know, we have to establish our own communities, our own networks. We have to self-promote. We talked about all these things. We have to self-care. And, you know, at some point, if we keep championing others to be the voices in these spaces and places, that at some point will transition to gatekeepers, right? Get these young people into the positions of leadership and influence and power. Once they become the gatekeepers, the culture is going to shift. I believe that's the wave we're waiting for. So the most important thing we do every day is embrace these people who are still moving through the ranks, right? And help them navigate it. All the things we talked about, help them figure out how to, you know, negotiate their salaries, how to have their voices heard, how to amplify others and lift others up. You know, as long as we continue to champion others, I believe that our spaces and places of safety, our sense of belonging at some point will shift. Maybe not in my career time, but I believe that that is the direction we have to be going in. So don't be depressed. Have hope. Have hope.
Okay. We do have a question for Dr. Bauer. There are very active working blind scientists and engineers associated with the National Federation of the Blind, and I wonder if you were involved with this organization.
Yes, that I'm not heavily involved with them, but I am aware that they have created a space for blind scientists and engineers to gather. Yeah, that's another great resource. I'm glad the questioner brought that up.
Great. This is a question for everyone. When did you start to feel like a scientist? Was this during graduate school or into your career? And has the imposter syndrome affected you during your career? Amy, your mic's still on. I'll start with you.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Then I'll mute myself. But oh, yes. I was just thinking while others were speaking, you know, about going through the career and this seniority, but, you know, at the top levels, you know, women are still breaking glass ceilings, okay, and moving up the ranks. And, you know, from my own experience doing so, I still feel that, you know, as chair of my department, the first woman out of, you know, maybe 15 previous chairs or something in the history of the department, like, wow, what am I doing here? What, can I do this? You know, what, you know, both as a woman and as a blind person, you know. So yes, the imposter syndrome still lives on, but I loved your phrasing, Gwyneth, before. It's manageable. It's manageable, and it's understandable why it happens, why I feel this way, but I can go on in spite of it. So I'll mute myself.
I think it's really cool that we talk that aspect of, as you said, as we've talked before about it not being so much imposter syndrome as imposter environment. And then you stop feeling like you should have, quote, gotten over it. You can't get over it until you stop encountering these these stimuli. So who's next? Is anybody?
I guess I'll jump in. Yeah. So I love this question. Like, when did you start to feel like a scientist? I love that. I would say it depends. Like, I don't know if I still feel like a scientist sometimes. I think I'll say it depends because, like I said, I work a lot with our Native students and I help them out with their research projects. So, you know, when we're doing our work together and I'm helping them answer some of their questions or look up resources and literature and like think through their questions and their methods and stuff, sure, like I can feel like a scientist because I'm helping them and I'm mentoring them through that process. Or when I'm like with some of my favorite things to do is work with our Native youth. So various tribes host great youth camps and I've been fortunate enough to go and present there. And so, yeah, like I want to actually pretend and put on my lab suit and everything and look like a scientist so that they see me and they know my background and they know where I come from and what I'm passionate about. But then they also like associate me to a scientist. So yeah, maybe that's the time where I feel like the most science person. But then, yeah, I think I also still, sometimes just feel like, boy, all these other scientists that I'm just so honored to be surrounded by, I mean, truly, they have amazing careers. They have publication records, all these things. So sometimes it's like, okay, well, I can feel myself getting to that point, but I don't know if I'm like in the club yet, you know. But yeah, so I guess my answer to that is it depends, the circumstance. And then as far as the imposter syndrome, I think, like I said, it's sort of changing over time and feeling more like I'm belonging. Thanks.
Yeah. Sabina and Doreen, we were very deliberate because people do sometimes talk about women, quote, in science in a very narrow way as just being academic tenure track. And we were very deliberate in wanting to talk about all the other ways there are to be pursuing STEM careers. So I don't want to leave you out of this question. I don't know if either of you have identified as a scientist, but you are certainly advancing science. Would either of you like to speak to this question?
Sure, I'd be happy to, Doreen, if that's okay, that I jump in, because
sure.
I have a rule with my team that I get called out when I say I'm not a scientist, because they hate that, but it happens, I'd say, in every staff meeting once. I'm just going to be blunt. When I read a report, when I talk to my team, my colleagues, when I talk to many of our collaboration partners, I still feel like a fish out of water because it's in many cases a language where I understand the high level hypothesis and all of that, but when it goes into the data, I'm just completely lost. And what I do is work with my team, listen to my team, try to understand where they're coming from and help them through their challenges. I don't do science myself. So it's an interesting struggle for me, I would say, and I'm very honest on that front. Every single day in this, especially over the last 6 years where I've been in this position where I'm totally surrounded by very accomplished scientists, bioscientists, biochemistry mostly, but a lot of other fields. And I just keep my head above water when it goes to the data side. But at the same time, I know that they sometimes struggle with some of the other maybe more emotional intelligence type aspects of the leadership world where I maybe have a little bit of an easier time. So I don't know whether it's imposter syndrome, but it's definitely for me this constant feeling of this might get a little rough, but I'll make my way through and just ask the right questions.
Thank you. Doreen, would you like to add to this?
Yeah, so I guess I'm a little bit in the middle. A lot of times I refer to the lab as a hybrid world. And as a national laboratory, we do have, some of the best and brightest minds, doing research. But I did work in science, so I can harken back to those old days. And when I heard the question, I kind of thought, well, that's almost like, when did you feel like you were a grown-up? And, I did have a job title as staff scientist. So I suppose when I took that job, that might have been when I felt like a scientist and I had a lab coat and, I worked in a lab. And but I never really thought about like I am a scientist. I mean, even though that was my title. I guess, and so I think Sarah also said it depends, right? Which that's a lawyer type answer. So maybe we need to get into the law too. But yeah, I mean, it kind of does because, I have a master's degree in engineering, I have a bachelor's in science. So I work with a bunch of PhD, scientists. And so, even with Sabine's, comments about being a non-scientist, there's also kind of a bit of a dichotomy between, having studied science at a lower graduate level versus being a PhD scientist, right? So there's all different ways, besides some of what we're talking about here today of ways people put other people in boxes, I guess is what it comes down to. But yeah, I guess that would be the time in my life where I felt like a scientist.
I'm going to let the audience know that we're having a little bit of technical trouble on the back end here. The questions going to the panel form are not presenting very nicely for me. I have 2 more I can read. Everything else has sort of vanished. So would you please, I still have the form for Catalina up. Would you please enter your questions there? And there is no button to choose a speaker there. So go ahead and just put that in the box, who you'd like to address it to if it's not for the whole panel. So I have 2 more questions. How do you approach women to be mentors? And a question for Sabina about the internships. Those are the only 2 I can read. Everyone else, please, I apologize, but resubmit your question on the form for Catalina and I will jump over there as soon as we're done with this. So Sabina, you mentioned an internship that was important at the beginning of your career. Does Siemens have an interest in US students as interns? And is there a possibility for cooperation between universities and Siemens toward promoting diversity in STEM?
Oh, that's like 2 hours worth of conversation, especially the second part. The first part, absolutely. So we do internships in R&D, we do internships in most other functions. We have quite a few programs out there for undergraduate students internships. We have programs for undergrad alumni. I never know how to describe the American education system, so forgive me here. So people with a bachelor degree that want to do a corporate career don't know yet exactly what they want to do. There are trainee programs, rotational programs. There's the level higher for master or master PhD with a number of years of experience that have rotational programs. But yes, if you're interested in an internship, I mean, you can reach out to me and I connect you to the right people. I love that. One of the best experiences, and as I said, I'm going to go on with this for a while until you stop me, Gwyneth. One of the best experiences that I've had is I work very closely, and some of my peers work very closely with an organization called Ron Brown's Foundation, Ron Brown Scholarship, which supports underprivileged African Americans that have extremely high, very accomplished from a high school career. And I've taken on 1 to 2 every summer. This was the biggest regret for me professionally, that this summer we couldn't do that because we had nobody to coach them. And many of them don't end up obviously working for us, but it's a great experience. I can only say, I mean, I did the internship after I was done with my first part of my college career. But it's such a good opportunity to learn what you like. and to get some visibility to what a corporate environment looks like, and to understand, okay, is this something that I could envision, or maybe it is not, and then I can go on to something else. So absolutely, we have many internship programs for anybody that's on the program here. I don't know how you connect people. You can email me directly. I can connect you with the various people in our HR teams. It's a fascinating program. Going back to the universities, we have some university relationships, obviously very, very targeted to some of the fields that we need, whether that's in engineering or in bioscience. I would be hard pressed to say exactly what they look like. Some of that is on our websites. From a collaboration perspective, I can only tell you that that's where the majority of our innovation input comes from. Obviously, we have our own R&D, that's what I'm part of, but we work very closely with many universities, with many hospitals, with many university hospitals on innovation in healthcare. And you can imagine that right now is, I'd say, about 80% of my day is discussing with clinical partners what's needed and where we're going with this. So I'll stop here.
Thank you. Our next question is, how do you approach women to be mentors, and how have you found those networks or created them for yourself? Anybody like to? This is for everyone.
With chocolate. That's my one-word answer. Okay.
Chocolate.
Thank you. Moving on. Just kidding. No, truly though, I don't know. I guess I come from that background where like bringing somebody a gift to just like initiate a relationship and showing some appreciation and respect in that way. That's, I mean, I haven't taken chocolate to people's office hours, but looking back, I probably should have used chocolate as that bait.
Didn't use cookies once. Just showed up with cookies. Hi, I'd like to talk to you. Anyone else?
Just reaching for myself anyway, as I mentioned earlier, I had to go seeking myself and just ask, and I found almost universal agreement, for people to help out.
I think one thing that was interesting for me once when I saw someone I was really impressed with, and I went up to them at the coffee hour to ask if they would consider being my mentor, and they asked me what specifically I wanted to be mentored in, and I was like, and so narrowing down the focus as far as, are you looking for professional development or technical, so learning to figure out what it is you are trying to advance, and knowing that when you approach is also really good. Doreen, did you have?
Sure. I was thinking about that question, and it occurred to me I've never probably ever asked anybody to be my mentor. But I've certainly picked up the phone, for example, when I was thinking about going into patent law. And I was working at Procter & Gamble, and I found out who the patent attorney was, who happened to be a woman. And yeah, I just picked up the phone and said, can I schedule some time, to sit in your office and ask some questions, thinking about going into patent law. And of course she said yes, and I got to know her that way. But I never officially asked her to, per se be my mentor. So I suppose I don't bring chocolate or cookies, I just adopt them. But I'm really asking them.
This is what we're doing now.
It's like, that kind of, I know, but we don't say. But yeah, I think, and the other thing too is it's not, again, from my perspective, having not ever really officially asked anybody, I observe. I guess I tend to be, maybe that's the scientist part of me. I'm very observant. I observe a lot. I observe behavior. I observe people or reading even, it's not necessarily a one-to-one, person to person, but just reading about people, and reading their stories, be it in the journals, professional journals, you know, you can see, okay, they got this degree, that degree, or they studied this, they participated in that. And I guess networking, I guess, is the only other thing I would suggest as well. That another adopted mentor told me, you know, when I was looking for positions in trying to get into patent law, in addition to her telling me, you know, once you pass the patent bar, there's a separate bar exam for patent law, apart from the actual state bar exam. And she, you know, she used to refer to the patent bar exam. She's like, once you pass that, that's your golden ticket. But then to join organizations, network, and just, you know, get out there, meet people, just get to know people, get to know their stories. And I think in that way you get more of a socialized networking and mentoring effect.
Thank you. Sabina, did you want to
throw in one thought, if I may, and that's pretty short, I hope. And that's to look out as a mentee when you're looking for a mentor. Try to be as diverse as possible. Don't just look for the people that are, you know, the person that is as close to you from a personality or a gender or whatever perspective as you can think of, because in a lot of cases you'll learn a lot from people that are very different. And you know, I can tell you that one of the first mentors that I had is the person that actually connected me with the Mariah Mitchell event here, which I'm absolutely grateful for. But I've had other mentors that were very, very different from me in terms of personality and gender. And it's in the things that you learn and that you pick up in an entirely different experience.
Thank you. And we have time for just one more question. It is probably too big to answer here, but we're going to try. In order to create or develop a culture of true inclusion and equality, what practices, rubrics, habits, phrasing do you think would help?
I could jump in on that. I feel enlightened recently by reading a book that was recommended by our retiring director at Woods Hole, Mark Abbott, called The Fearless Organization. It has a subtitle, which I can't remember. It's by Amy Edmondson. And that's about changing the culture within organizations to be more open, creative, innovative through inclusion. And by that, I mean inclusion of ideas and basically trying to help create a psychologically safe environment for people to work together, converse together, brainstorm together without fear of personal judgment. And so as a resource, I recommend that book for just this kind of question.
Thank you. Again, that was, can you say it again? Amy Edmondson's
The Fearless Organization.
The Fearless Organization. Thank you. Would anybody else like a few final thoughts as we wrap?
I would just add on that in terms of, like I said, that was a big topic, a lot to unpack there. But I guess the thought that came to my mind was just basic respect. You know, for each individual, their thoughts, their backgrounds, what they have to offer, their talents. Yeah, I think that could go a long way.
And we've seen in some of the DEI research, like the way Google released a study on their team building, which shows that you don't have to wait for everyone to have learned how to be respectful. You can do things like putting in standards for meetings, a basic, you know, here's how we will conduct our meeting guidelines, sort of thing that sort of enforces the process of respect while we're waiting for the hearts and minds. So, any other thoughts?
I guess I'll just reiterate what I think Catalina and maybe some other folks said, but because I don't have any, I think Amy and Doreen answered it just fine. But I guess just to come back about the importance of a new generation transitioning into the gatekeeper position. across the board. And I think that's what it's going to take. And I truly think that we're at the cusp of a lot of that and things really shifting. Big paradigm shift coming, I hope.
I hope so as well. Well, I want to thank you all. I'll just reiterate some of the takeaways we've had today, that you aren't imagining the barriers. And the biggest way we've heard to manage that is to have your connections, build your connections. Most of our panelists referred to someone in their childhood who was encouraging them, and we need to keep having that in our lives moving forward at any age to stay engaged. We've heard that hiding yourself and parts of yourself hinders you as well. So you have to find your connections and your places where you feel the freedom to be your whole self, so that you have that basis to contribute from. Surround yourself with the people who are going to champion you. Build your community. It's a recurring theme here, to help you thrive where you are, if that's where you choose to be. Find a partner who can boost your signal. We heard that back in the talk about negotiating salary, and also in meetings and just promoting yourself for various promotion processes and stuff. Having a partner who can boost your signal. Remembering again, to find spaces where you can be your whole self, so that you can carry that sense of belonging into imposter environments. And build places where you can find places where you can build your science identity, and support efforts for mentorship, lift others as we climb, and recognize that there's a place for diversity, equity, and inclusion work in every decision point at every one of these gates. So I want to thank each of our panelists for this dialogue, and thank all of our audience for your time and attention, your participation, and for being here today. This was Mariah Mitchell's vision, communities supporting women in STEM, and you are that community, each one of you, women and allies. This has been a real pleasure, and while I eagerly look forward to the day we can continue these conversations in person, I hope that we can each take every opportunity technology affords to continue building this community in the meantime. Be well. And now please welcome Jason Leonardo Finger to deliver our closing remarks. Jason is the Deputy Director and Curator of the Mitchell House Archives and Special Collections. She is a talented historian and a tireless champion of Mariah Mitchell's legacy. Her energy and dedication brought us here today. This could not have happened without her efforts, and that is no exaggeration. Thank you, Jason, and over to you.
Thank you, Gwyneth. Thank you all for your patience with our Zoom snafus today. I apologize. You will be able to find this in the next week or so on our website and on our YouTube channel, and I will let everyone know that the recording is available. But I would like to thank you all for joining us this afternoon for our online shortened version of the Mariah Mitchell Women of Science Symposium. We are saddened to not be able to host this as a two-day in-person event, but we hope to be able to do so September 23rd to 25th, 2021. So please keep an eye on our website. I would like to thank our wonderful keynote speaker and panelists for their time, enthusiasm, help, advice, and for sharing their experiences and thoughts with us today. I would also like to thank the MMWIS committee and advisors, the co-chairs of the MMWIS, the Mariah Mitchell Association Board of Directors, and all the people who helped to make today's event possible, including NCTV and D. White. I would also like to thank our sponsors of the online event, the American Astronomical Society, Novartis, and the Tuppence C. Harris Foundation of 1986. If we were meeting in person, we would have remained together as a group for the speakers and panels, breaking out into small salon gatherings of 20 or fewer, so that we could address the topics discussed and start to create real-world solutions that we could then bring back to our places of work and education. We would meet with the same salon throughout the MMWIS, which helps to provide a safe and comfortable environment to freely express our thoughts and feelings, as well as our ideas for creating solutions. This is what happened during our first MMWIS in 2018. Mariah Mitchell, raised as a Quaker, believed in hands-on learning by doing, and the salons are a crucial component to our in-person MMWIS and influenced by her belief and practice. While we were unable to meet in person, I hope that today's brief gathering has brought you some ideas and solutions, and also brought you a sense of community and common cause. In closing, I hope that you and your loved ones remain safe and healthy, and I would like to close with some of Mariah Mitchell's own thoughts, and I speak them aloud in the house where she was born in 1818. Excuse me, I always cry when I talk about Mariah. Are we women using all the rights we have? We have the right to steady and continuous effort after knowledge after truth. Who denies our rights to lifelong study? Yet you will find most women leave their studies when they leave the classroom. You have heard many a woman say, I was very fond of Latin when I went to school, but I've forgotten all I knew. Or, I used to love mathematical studies, but I don't know the first thing now. Now, if Latin was worth studying in youth, it is worthy of study in middle life. For women, there are undoubtedly great difficulties in the path, but so much the more to overcome. First, no woman should say, I am but a woman. But a woman, what more can you ask to be? Born a woman with the average brain of humanity, born with more than the average heart, if you are mortal, what higher destiny could you have? No matter where you are, nor what you are a power. Your influence is incalculable. Personal influence is always underrated by the person. We are all centers of spheres. We see the portions of the sphere above us, and we see how little we affect it. We forget the part of the sphere around and before us. It extends just as far every way. In my younger days, when I was pained by half-educated, loose, and inaccurate ways, which we all had, I used to say, how much women need exact science? But since I have known some workers in science who were not always true to the teaching of nature, who have loved self more than science, I have said, how much science needs women. Please, if you'd like to speak to us about becoming more involved in the MMWIS or would like to support our efforts, please email me. Donations are always appreciated to support the effort and will be used to support student and teacher scholarships for our next in-person meeting of the MMWIS, which we hope will be next September 2021. So as I mentioned, please keep an eye on our website. I will be in touch with you to let you know when the recording is available. And I thank you all for being with us today, and all of our panelists and our speaker, and Gwyneth and Joe and our board and our symposium committee and advisors. We could not have done this without you. Thank you all very much, and be well.